Books are a uniquely magical doorway beyond the things we know. Not only do they tell us that dragons exist, but they can be beaten and overcome. In today's charged atmosphere, books show us we're not alone. They help us understand our heartbreaks and joys. They connect us to others who feel and have felt the same. Books and reading allow us to live 1,000 lives, sending us soaring into the world outside of ourselves, not to escape, but to survive. For it is often said that the greatest secrets seem to be found in the most unlikely places. Welcome to the podcast, Books Are Magical. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Books Are Magical podcast. I'm Hannah. I'm joined today by my co-host Rachel, and we have an amazing special guest for you today. We're going to be covering a brand new book that's coming out on April 30th called Happy Medium, which is written by Sarah Adler. And we're so happy to be able to chat with her today and have her as a guest. We both thoroughly enjoyed this book. I think I flew through it in the space of 2 days, did not put it down, didn't do any of the things I should have been doing, and literally just read the book itself. So I hope that speaks volumes, but we are so excited to learn more about the book and just hear from Sarah herself. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you.
Well, thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I am Sarah Adler. I write rom-coms about lovable weirdos finding their happily ever afters. I am originally from Pennsylvania. I went to college in DC. Now I live in Maryland. And I have a daughter and a husband and a really bad cat who is around here somewhere and hopefully will not be interrupting this recording. That's me.
Well, welcome to this show. We so love having you, and I am going to echo what Hannah said about this book. I absolutely loved it. Think I read it in maybe 2, if not like 2.5 sittings at the most, because it's such a fast, fun, easy read. It is cozy. It is heartwarming. It hit me in all the right feel-good places. And I think it hit me in a perfect moment. This spring season felt right for this book. So I think whoever decided to drop this right now was brilliant, because this is going to be a wonderful poolside read. I am going to recommend it to just about anybody that I can tell that this book is just going to make you feel all the great ways in any possible way. Also, can you write me like I'm a weirdo and I could really use a happily ever after, just by the way? Like, I need one of those.
Yeah, maybe for book 5, I think, is where I'm at right now. So.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That's awesome. So this is your second book, and I know we'd love to hear about kind of both your books, but just focusing on this new release first for Happy Medium. If you could kind of summarize this book in a nutshell, which I know is probably the hardest thing to do, because how do you summarize 300 amazing pages into a couple sentences? But I'd love for our readers just to have a little bit of background on what this book is about.
So Happy Medium is about a fake spirit medium who accepts a job exorcising a purportedly haunted goat farm in the Maryland countryside. But when she gets there, she discovers that there is a hostile, grumpy farmer who is very hot, and he does not want her there. He sees right through her. And there's also a real ghost that she can actually see and talk to. And so this is the story of her trying to convince this hot, skeptical farmer that there is actually a family curse that threatens him with a fate worse than death. And there's a lot of laughs along the way, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was very much laughable. It was quirky. It was funny. Everything that you wanted to happen kind of happened, and everything you kind of didn't want to happen also happened too, which was great in all the best ways. I mean that in all the best ways. I was going to say, so we just actually read a book recently about happily ever afters failing. And I love the fact that you mentioned, like, you kind of write books about happily ever afters. So what are your thoughts about these characters kind of finding their future? I don't want to give too much away. I want to keep the spoilers to a minimum.
I mean, I think the happily ever after in romance is what draws people to the genre. It's very reassuring. It's one of those things. I have an anxiety disorder, and when I found the romance genre, it was a relief to know I could read and not be like left distressed by what I was reading. So on a kind of personal mental health and just like vibes level, I really love the happily ever after. And then in this story specifically, I mean, obviously I knew it was going to have a happily ever after, but it kind of surprised me that it wasn't just the romantic relationship, but also a bunch of characters who were immensely lonely, kind of finding each other and finding a place to belong and people to belong to, and people who love them for who they are. And so I think that's sort of the beauty of this particular happily ever after, is it's also about belonging and friendship and not having to be alone.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I feel like that message comes through even from the first chapter when we first meet Gretchen. I wasn't sure what to think going into a book about essentially a con artist, and was just completely thrown aback by how much I immediately loved her, despite kind of her shady choices in the beginning. And you clearly see the reasons why she's made these choices, and you empathize with her. And then we meet Charlie, the love interest, and I just felt like throughout the book it was almost like, I'm sorry to quote Shrek, but it felt like onion with the layers on these characters, just so much nuance, so much depth. And I read romance heavily. Like you said, it is kind of my happy place. I love having a like the ending, it's a given, but the journey that it took to get there and like really learning all the different layers of these characters was just like chef's kiss, wonderful. And I want to give you kudos for that, but also I'm so curious from the writing perspective, how do you write characters that are so nuanced in a genre that sometimes feels like they can be one-dimensional really easily?
So it's interesting craft-wise. I've seen a few people skeptical about the fact that this is a book that is in the third person present. But I think that's actually the secret to Gretchen, especially. When I first started writing it, it was first person present, which is what my debut, Mrs. Nash's Ashes, was in. And something about it was just feeling off. And so anytime that happens, my first thing is I switch POV or tense or both. And so I tried it out in third. I had read a lot of recent romances that did a great job with the third person present, and so I was like, I'm going to give that a shot. And I sent it to a very trusted friend and said, which of these is working for you? And she said, I really like the third person because that way you get to know Gretchen without immediately having to buy into her. Because that was kind of the issue, I think, with the first person, of that if you didn't already like her, if you had an issue with what she was doing, it was going to be very hard to follow her through the story, being in her head all the time. And I think that the third, still focusing on her, kind of allows you to warm up to her and see her thought processes in a way that maybe she would not be fully aware of if it was her perspective. So as far as Gretchen, I think the secret actually was at a craft level, just doing that, even though I know some people aren't a fan. Hopefully it works out for them. If not, that's okay. Everyone has their preferences. I think otherwise, I've just always been really interested in people and like understanding people. Maybe it's my neurodivergence peeking out, but I've always just kind of enjoyed watching people, listening to people, especially those that I'm just drawn to because I find them interesting, and just kind of trying to figure out what makes them tick, speech patterns, just all of their layers. And so I think that naturally comes out in my storytelling as well, of, what I find interesting in a person is what I find interesting in a character. And so those different layers wind up being kind of thrown in there because that's what I'm finding interesting about them, of, what kinds of shows are they watching in their spare time? Or, what is some weird thing that happened to them as a child that still affects them today? Because that's what people are like.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I really like that. So Gretchen she's constantly running from her past, the one that her father pushed her into, which is this con artist sort of mentality. And yet she still can't seem to shake it with her job, but she seems to do this quote unquote fake medium job with some heart. Because when you kind of listen to her talk about it, she really does do it with some heart with regards to trying to give people a little hope. And I really like that you didn't put her into a category of being so, yes, she's fake and she knows she's fake, but she also knows how to read people really well. And she kind of knows how to give them what they need in the moment that they're kind of needing something. So I like that you didn't go with the, like, you know, feeding into like the tarot cards and the crystal balls and all this sort of stuff, because you probably could have easily been like, oh yeah, she's a fake medium. So of course she's going to do all the, you know, don't look behind the curtain sort of thing. So I really like that you did give her a lot of heart, even though she knows she's conning people, she's still giving them a sense of hope too.
Yeah, I think that came from kind of a couple things. First of all, I mean, I love a quote unquote unlikable female main character, but at the same time, you do need to be able to root for them. And I've seen the sort of con artist with a heart of gold done very well by several authors. Kelly Siskind has a really good book about a con artist / art thief, I think. And of course, Jennifer Cruzy, who's one of my favorite authors of all time, has a whole family, the Dempseys, who are con artists or were, and are trying to shake their past or use it for good. And so I've always kind of loved the idea of that. Also, one of my favorite actors, comedians, magicians of all time, Harry Anderson, who was on Night Court. I kind of loved his whole vibe of like sort of the bunny ears con artist, where he was eventually, I mean, he was not doing tricks on the street to steal money from people, but he was still kind of a trickster. And I've always had a soft spot for that. Yeah, I mean, I think it also, there's the Kate Claiborne book, Love at First, and there's a line in it about how you don't have to love the way you learn to love at first. And I think that that's kind of the same journey that Gretchen is on, where she's still trying to figure out how to care about people and be a good person. And the way she was taught, she's trying to get out of that, but she's still trying to figure out what the other option is. And I think that's really interesting too, when you don't have the tools necessarily to be the person you want to be, the way you try anyway. And I think that says a lot about her, that she's still trying, just not necessarily maybe the best way.
Yeah. I actually wrote down a question about, do you consider Gretchen to be a likable, in air quotes, relatable character? But I think you really summarized it nicely. And also, I feel like as much as I didn't want to like what she was doing, all of those little things, all of those like sweet moments where she was showing how much she cared for other people, where you could see that she was trying to learn how to like process emotion and not use it as part of the con. It's just, you can see like she is truly trying to be good, and maybe it's going to take her a little bit longer than a bit of us, but she's getting there. And like you said, you do just root for her from beginning to end. I really, really thought she was a really interesting character in the best way possible. I was really curious because you mentioned her past with, her father being like almost like the ultimate con artist, and she alludes to some of the things that she's doing with him. But I think that third person narrative was kind of smart in that you can see that she's trying to remove herself from it. She doesn't really talk about the experience of it a lot in detail. She doesn't like sit there and like have, outside of one particular instance, which I'm not going to talk about because spoilers, but she doesn't go into in a lot of detail. And I was really interested to see kind of what was your intention with that. Was that something that you always wanted to do, was not go too in depth about her past? Or was that something that you kind of had to change as you were writing this?
I think that the story is so much about Gretchen's journey to finding a way to be the person she wants to be, that I didn't want to linger too much on her past. And I did want people to still root for her, and I didn't want to get bogged down in the details of things she might have done before, especially things that she might not have done willingly when she was much, much younger. But it was also important to me that she acknowledged that she did make the decision to con people, like when she was an adult and knew what she was doing. Yeah, I just think the description of past cons would have bogged down the narrative. Honestly, this is a long book. It might not feel it, which I appreciate, but this book is much longer than my last one. Mrs. Nash's Ashes was something like 86,000 words, and this one was like 104,000. And I just frankly didn't have room for certain things. It is interesting. I try not to read my reviews, but my husband does report back to me on kind of trends, or will read me really nice ones. And it keeps coming up that people feel like the situation with her father is left unresolved. And it's funny to me because on one hand, I did that kind of intentionally because sometimes life is like that. Like, not everything is a nice, neat bow at the end. And while I want to give readers happily ever afters, I don't necessarily want to. I mean, it's kind of silly because this is a book with a ghost and like at a goat farm, and it's very silly, but like, I don't necessarily want it to feel unrealistic. At the same time, my editor, when she first read through, she's like, I think we need a scene with her and her dad. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I wrote one. And she wrote back saying, wow, you worked so hard on this. Thank you so much for that. That being said, I do not think it works and we should cut it. And I was like, okay, good. It's not just me that had that instinct then. But it is funny because like that is something we kind of tried to change in the narrative, and it did not work. So to then see people being like, but what happens? It's like, I promise you, you did not want that chapter.
That's so funny.
Yeah, so her past I feel like is her past, and in this particular story, the more that she could let that go, the more growth she could have.
I like that.
That's very smart, because you can see her making the choice to go, this doesn't have any power over me anymore, and I'm not going to let it suck me back in. And I thought that was really powerful. Even if it is something that, like you said, it is unresolved, I think it's the right call for her. And like you said, we don't have to have everything tied up in a bow. It's not how life is. And sometimes you need to walk away and know that you did the right decision for you, and that's it. Not to take a completely different turn in the conversation, but the setting for this was so unique. Like you said, dealing with ghosts, dealing with a goat farm made me giggle so much. And I'm just super curious, what drew you to a goat farm versus like a cow farm or a chicken farm? You can see my knowledge of like livestock is absolutely nothing here. But goats I love, but I'm like, what was the decision-making process for that?
It was purely for the bit. I mean, I came up with the pun of I ain't afraid of no goats as like the first thing in the story. I was playing a game with myself that I sometimes play with my husband, sometimes by myself when I'm bored, of just coming up with a pun, like a bad pun, and figuring out what that book would be about if it was the title. And I was just like folding laundry or something, and I was like, I ain't afraid of no goats. Huh. And it kind of started out as a joke. I actually posted it on Twitter back then as a joke in like October of 2021. I think that was 2022. Like, it just wouldn't leave me alone. I was like, okay, maybe I actually have to write this. And so for that pun to work, it had to be a goat farm. And it just so happened that I live probably like 45 minutes away from a really lovely goat farm that has a lot of babies in the spring, and they have like open visiting hours anytime you want. So I was like, obviously this is a good excuse to go there and hang out with some baby goats. So I did that. Shout out to Molly at George's Mill for letting me hang out at her farm and talk to her about raising goats one day, and for letting everyone visit the babies whenever. So that was part of it. There was like a very brief second where I was like, what if it was a sheep farm and then we turned it into Fleeced? Like, that would also be a fun title. But at that point, I'd already done a lot of research on goats and watched a lot of videos of goats giving birth. And I was like, I'm not having done that for nothing. So Yeah, that's kind of my goats. They're interesting. I don't think I would be a good goat farmer, and I did not go into this with the knowledge of goat farming, but it's really interesting, like the way they milk them, what they make from the milk, like their diet, and like the whole process of gestation. I don't know. It's a whole bunch of stuff that I learned to write this, and I probably still got a lot of it wrong, and none of that is Molly at George's Mill's fault. That's all my fault.
Are they gonna start taking up goat yoga too? Because like that was one of the funniest parts of the goat yoga. I was like, yes, I love yoga. I don't know if I can do it with little baby goats running around me, but
and peeing on the yoga mats.
Well, true. That's true too. Probably trying to eat my hair or my mat, nibble on the blocks, those sorts of things. Was really cute. And just going back to her father, I think that the way she spoke about her father in some of the chapters, I think if you had included a meetup with him, it would have given me anxiety because she was running so hard from him that I would have been like, oh no, not this. She has been trying so hard to escape that life. I don't want to deal with this right now. So kudos to you for sticking to your guns and for that chapter not working accidentally on purpose, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I tried. I really did try. And I will say that is one of the funniest edit notes that my editor has ever given me of like, good job with this. That being said, let's get rid of it.
Kudos to her.
Yes, kudos to Sarir for knowing how to make a good book, even when I don't.
Yeah, when you get that comment of, wow, you put a lot of work into it, you go, oh, yeah, that's a no.
Your interview was really well done. Oh, okay, thanks. That's all you have to say. I'll see myself out.
Yeah, I can really see the effort you put into doing this. It's like, uh-oh.
Oh, no. Compliment sandwich or something. So I will say that I loved seeing their relationship, how absolutely they did not really like each other. They were absolutely not going to get along. And I don't even really want to call it enemies to lovers, but really it was like opposites to lovers. Or, I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to kind of find what it is. Hannah, you maybe can find it. Is it enemies to lovers? Because you would maybe know a little better than me.
I don't know. I had that same thought too. It's almost like they're at odds more than anything. Like they want opposite things, but at the same time, oh my God, the tension, I think that's what kept me like reading. I was reading till like 2 a.m. because I was just like, kiss, 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 kiss already. The tension is so good. It's such a good slow burn. But at the same time, I think it's just because, again, like they want opposite things, but you know that they will be happier if they just start to work together, and you're just like, I want to force you in a room. Come on, guys.
Kiss, kiss. Yeah, I kept thinking, I was like, man, they have so much in common that they don't realize that they have in common. They're both stubborn and they're like, both hard-headed. I was like, look, they actually have more in common than they really knew that they did. And she really wanted his business to succeed. She was going to help him, make the farm thrive. And I think he really wanted it to thrive. He just didn't really want to fail. I think he was more scared to fail, it seemed. I don't know. I just really like that relationship because sometimes it is just a little too cutesy, and I really like that they kind of kept butting heads, and he would be like, here's your bag of Walmart stuff. And she'd be like, oh, he bought me stuff.
Now, is butting heads a goat pun intentionally, or did that just happen?
Wait, for me? I think I said that accidentally. But you're right. They do. Okay, there you go. There's my pun. I didn't even realize it.
I don't know. I mean, Sarah, would you classify this as any kind of trope, or do you feel like this kind of just stands on its own, breaks out of the box?
I mean, I would say it is enemies to lovers in that he very much dislikes her from the get-go. He's like, I see that you are fake. I see that you are doing something harmful to one of my friends. I do not trust you, and I want you to be gone. And I mean, even even the way she kind of convinces him to let her stay is very underhanded. It is not technically blackmail, and it's not technically extortion, but it's a variety of something like that. And so, I mean, he definitely dislikes her, but he's also like, man, she's really hot though. He's attracted to her and he can't figure out why. And I think that she is immediately attracted to him too, but then is like, oh, he's like so stubborn, like he won't even hear me out. So, I mean, I don't think she has that dislike towards him, at least not at the same intensity, because she doesn't really have a need to, but she does find him frustrating, and he, for good reason, does not trust her. So it is kind of an enemies to lovers situation, I think, because they are starting out with very opposing goals. Her goal is to convince him of this curse, and his goal is to not be convinced of this curse. And I mean, there's also slow burn for sure, as far as tropes, and forced proximity because she is living in the farmhouse while she is at the farm for a month. I guess maybe morally gray female main character would apply here. Yeah, I think there's a lot of tropes. I did make a trope graphic at some point, but I do not have it in front of me, so I don't remember what I included.
I mean, all the tropes you said are my favorites, so, I mean, just check all the boxes right there, so.
We haven't really talked too much about Everett the ghost yet, so what was writing him like? Because I thought he was so cleverly done. He was like a family member that maybe Charlie would have known, but maybe he also would have been just slightly obscure enough that Charlie would have been like, yeah, you could have like looked that up on Ancestry.com. Like, and I really liked that. And he was like one of my favorite, like probably my favorite character. I don't know. I just loved how he just wanted to watch TV. Like, we'll flip the pages of the book and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's a real scene stealer. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted from him going in. I knew that to have a ghost, I needed to make him interesting. Part of it was one of my favorite holiday rom-coms is Sarah Hogel's Just Like Magic. And the male main character in that book is the embodiment of the holiday spirit, named Hall for holiday. And it's very much like kind of this Buddy the Elf vibe, but like make it swoony. I don't know. And so I was definitely inspired a bit by Sarah Hogel's ability to write someone who is like very outgoing and enthusiastic and like almost like in an old movie, like fast talking. And I kind of added my own twist on that, of course, by making him from the 1920s. I have a background in history, so I love doing little bits of history in some manner in all my stuff. Making him television obsessed, I just thought was hilarious. Because, like, what else are you going to do as a ghost? Like, over 100 years, like, TV is going to blow your mind, especially if you were already really interested in film when you died. And so I thought that was a lot of fun. But, like, I think his like hidden depths kind of emerged as I wrote him of like, oh, he's not just kind of pervy and like wants attention and wants to watch TV. He also is another deeply lonely person. And he was deeply lonely in life as well as death. And Gretchen's friendship is something that he never expected and doesn't quite know what to do with. As, you know, you find out as you read, he doesn't really know what he's doing to make her his friend. And so, yeah, I think he adds a little something, and a lot of it is comedic relief, but I think it's also just an important element of Gretchen's growth.
Yeah, it almost felt like he was the only way that she could safely feel like she could have a friend, because she was so mistrusting and didn't want to be vulnerable or show weakness around other people. But I mean, what's going to happen with the ghost? He literally could not leave her. So it was almost like it gave her a safety net to learn how to love. And I loved him. I loved their relationship. There was a moment where I was like, should I be shipping them? And then I was like, no. The relationship's here. They're just friends. But I'm like, when she first meets him, like, okay, hot ghost from the 1920s. I can get it with it. That's fine. So I don't know. Maybe other people will ship it. I hope not, because I loved Charlie and Gretchen, but I just thought it was so funny that he kept like almost hitting on her at the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first woman he's been able to talk to in 100 years. He's got a lot of pent-up flirting. But very quickly, he's like, yeah, I love you like a sister. But he acknowledges like a hot sister. So yeah, he's been alone for a long time, and I think he's kind of lost the ability to talk to somebody else in a way that is normal. I think he was a little bit like that in life too, but maybe not quite as overt.
Yeah, I'm curious for him, but also, you mentioned that you're neurodivergent. I'm also neurodivergent. Just curious, do you feel like Everett or any other characters may be neurodivergent coded in any way?
It's hard for me to tell because I did not know I was neurodivergent until pretty recently. I've come to realize over the course of therapy over the last couple of years that, hey, maybe that's like not, maybe my thought processes are not necessarily how everyone thinks. I know that I've seen some people talk about Millie and Mrs. Nash's Ashes as being very neurodivergent coded. And then Hollis has an anxiety disorder. With both Millie and to some degree Everett, they're kind of what happens if I just let my brain run wild without sort of pushing the brakes at all, of like this kind of rapid thought, making strange connections, impulsive. So maybe, but I don't know if I would feel comfortable saying I intended to do any of that. It kind of is just another tool I have in my brain of like letting it do what it wants for certain characters and reeling it in for others.
I like your characters. I think they're incredibly relatable, especially in this book. The neurodivergence feels like, if I know I was recently diagnosed with an anxiety disorder as well. So I, of course, did not realize growing up that that was just part of who I was. And so when I get to see books and characters in books that actually kind of represent, a little bit of someone who's like on the neurodivergent spectrum, I'm like, yes, please. Like, I just need characters that I can identify more than just the happy, like I don't always relate with those, but when I get characters that are a little more quirky, I'm like, I can relate to those so much more. Yeah, that's why I'm like, lovable weirdos with the happily ever after. That's what I'm looking for. I need that lovable weirdo because that's what I feel like in my life. I loved it. I absolutely loved everything about this book.
Thank you. I do think it's funny because like I've heard some people talk about the banter, especially in Mrs. Nash's Ashes, as being not like how people talk. And it's like, well, you clearly have not been in a room with two people with ADHD having a conversation because that is exactly how it goes, of this like constant bouncing off of each other. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think I've learned so much about myself in writing that I did not know was there, for better or worse. It's always kind of exciting when I start a new project of like, oh, what thing am I going to learn about myself next? But my feeling on it is I really appreciate and really treasure when somebody sees themselves in one of my characters or feels a connection to them. And whether that's because they connect with some sort of aspect of neurodivergence or some aspect of, some sort of trauma or some sort of whatever, it's always kind of an honor to me that I was able to do that for them. And I don't necessarily feel comfortable or need to put labels necessarily on my characters because I want people to be able to build that connection regardless of the labels.
I love that. And I think, even among neurodivergent people, there's so many things that kind of cross over between, different labels or types on the spectrum. I think it's smart just to leave it open-ended because I feel like you said, you can see little bits just from other people. Even if it's not 100%, I could still connect to Everett. I could still connect to Charlie, to Gretchen. And I think, again, it goes back to just having these really layered authentic characters. And I feel like that, like, I love the romance, I love the setting and the humor, but I feel like the characters are what really made me go, this is 5 stars. This is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I hope our audience thinks the same way.
I do too. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so too.
And I'm definitely going to go have to pick up your first book, Mrs. Nash's Ashes, because not only do I love the title and how alliterative it is, I like, it only just came out, about 11 months ago, according to what I found on Goodreads. It came out in May. So we're dropping this one about right at 11 months later. So that's phenomenal. And, plus it got really great reviews as well. And I'm definitely adding it to my TBR list because it looks hilarious and fun and cute, and anything that like that is definitely going to be on my list.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a different vibe, but I hope that people who enjoyed it will love Happy Medium and vice versa. I'm seeing a lot of people tagging me in Instagram stuff saying that Happy Medium is their first book of mine, and so it's really exciting to me that I now technically have a backlist that they can go read, because before they were like, I looked up what else she's written and there was nothing. And so I'm glad to now be able to direct people to my other book if they haven't read it yet.
Sounds like you have some things on the horizon too. It sounded like when you were kind of talking earlier that you had a couple things kind of in the works.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of publishing, traditional publishing, is that, especially if you're on like a book a year kind of schedule, like I am, you're always working on multiple things at very different stages. So like Happy Medium is coming out in a couple weeks, and so promo is ramping up, aka talking to lovely folks like you and doing other sorts of text-based interviews and posting constantly on social media. And all of that is happening. And at the same time, I am revising my third book, Finders Keepers, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but we've just talked about, I think it's probably coming out in July next year. I'm like deep in revisions on book 3 while promoting book 2, trying not to forget that book 1 exists, trying to still talk that up to people and signing it when I go to bookstores. And then before I got my revisions back, I was starting to draft book 4, which I have not sold yet. But the ideal is to get some of it done so that I can sell it. And then once that is done, then I'll probably start book 5 in early next year, drafting that with you as a main character, Rachel, apparently.
Yay. I need a happy ending. That's all I'm saying. Is I need somewhere in life I need a happy ending.
I'll see what I can do.
I'm 42 years in, and I've got 2 dogs to show for it.
I mean, honestly, dogs won't let you down either. They're a happy ending as well.
They are. They do have happy little tails that will certainly wag when they are so happy to see you.
But yeah, it's interesting because I'm always kind of living in various years at one time, and like half the time I write the wrong year on date fields, like when I'm filling out checks or something. Because like obviously I guess it's 2024, but like my next one's out in 2025, and then the next one will be 2026. So I'm constantly thinking about 2-3 years ahead, and my calendar gets filled up pretty far out trying to plan around pub days and when deadlines will be. And it's a really interesting occupational hazard of never knowing what year I'm living in.
I don't know if you are a full-time author, but that sounds like a crazy full-time job to just be constantly living and writing and revising and posting, and it sounds like a lot.
It is, and it is my full-time job. I'm very lucky. The fact that I know many people who do this on top of having a full-time job, and often in something that's like very intense, like Maisie Eddings is a dentist, and like a bunch of people I know are lawyers, and just like people who have jobs that are very much 9-to-5s or beyond, and then still manage to be highly successful authors on top of it blows my mind. Because I started writing while at home with my daughter. I mean, she was an infant, so there was a lot of nap time at first, so that made it a little easier. But yeah, I don't know how people manage this not as a full-time job, and I wish everyone, I'm very, very fortunate that I can swing it. I wish that for anybody who wants it, pay authors more, buy their books.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for visiting with us, for spending a little bit of time talking about your book, both your new and your past book. And I'm certainly going to pick up your past book and the one coming out next year. Both of them are going to go on my list. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us about your next book when it comes out next year, whenever it may be.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. And I would love to come back and chat anytime. This has been a real pleasure.
Oh, we're glad to hear that. And I mean, we wish you all the success with this new book. I know it's going to knock it out of the park just from reading it. I guess until next time, everyone, may your reading adventures always take you to new horizons.
Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you on the next page.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Books Are Magical. Please connect with us through our email, booksaремagicalpodcast@gmail.com, or through our Instagram direct messages at booksaремagicalpod. And until next time, open doors, turn pages, and connect with the world around you.